a Delhi-based think tank where she engages in rigorous analysis of policies and budgets at different levels of governance and leads research on public financing of education. Her broad areas of interest are social sector policy, education, public finance, and gender. The area she works includes economics of education, education financing, education equity, early childhood education, and gender. Responsive budgeting for education. She has worked as an economist at the Policy Group of Infrastructure Development Finance Company Limited, and she has also worked as a consultant at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and has contributed to policymaking initiatives at forums like G20 and BRICS. Before we move on with the talk, a few instructions for the audience. We will proceed with the talk now, and which will be followed by the Q&A session later. You can either post your questions as the talk progresses or address the speaker directly during the Q&A session. I also request everyone to please keep your mics muted so there are no distractions during the talk. Thank you. I now welcome Dr. Provita to initiate the talk.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Anu. Thank you, Rekha, for inviting me. So today is a special day from many angles. Firstly, I can see, Anu, that today is Onam, so today is a festival, but at the same time, if we look from the education angle, today is International Literacy Day. And also, the Human Development Report 2021 is going to launch today only. So many events are happening today. Now, I will talk about public financing for school education. But before starting the conversation on public financing of school education, let me a little bit focus on International Literacy Day or literacy as a whole. Can I share my screen? Yeah. Can you see the screen? Is it full screen?
Yes, ma'am, we can see it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so as I already mentioned that today is International Literacy Day, and this time the theme is transforming literacy learning space to guarantee quality, equitable, and inclusive education for all. So whenever we are talking about education, we always keep in mind these components: quality, equity, all these characteristics, equity, inclusive education for all. That means we are looking education from the human development perspective, or where education is considered as the basic capability. It's a basic capability where it has both the intrinsic as well as instrumental value. It's not a means, but an end in itself. And that's why whenever we look education from the human development perspective, when the Human Development Index, which was constructed in by Amartya Sen Mehboob Haq, where we will see that literacy rate was taken as one of the core indicators. It was their adult literacy rate. It was there till 2010, and then it's changed to two other indicators of schooling, that it's average years of schooling or mean years of schooling, end years of schooling. These are the two indicators. So literacy, schooling, these are very much important indicators for human development. Now, this is literacy is a very crude indicators. So because it says that people of age 7 years and above who can read and write comprehensively are literate. So very crude indicator for a basic education. Now, if we look at even that particular indicator, the adult literacy rate in India in comparison to some of the BRICS countries, or BRICS countries, you might can call it this Mexico and Indonesia, the similar kind of countries, then we can see that there is a literacy gap between India and the rest of the BRICS countries is around 30% and above. Again, if we take this all India picture of literacy, it doesn't say much, because it conceals a lot. So when we look at the data at the state level, So look at the state level disparities where Kerala it's 94% and in Bihar it is 62%. Now even state itself is a big unit. So look at the district level, what is happening to literacy. District is more of kind of homogeneous socioeconomic characteristic. The districts have its own administrative unit, but the top 5 districts, you can see the literacy rate is around 96%, whereas the bottom 5 districts, it's around 36%. Now, this is not the end. When we look from the gender or social, from the social gender perspective, then we can see the variation. The most vulnerable are rural female, those who are from scheduled tribe groups. So from whatever angle we look at the literacy, it shows that India is still not in place. It's far from reaching the basic, achieving the basic crude indicator. So here we are talking with a basic indicator, we are talking about human development aspects. But even if we look education from the human capital approach, which is now more, what we can say that government is more leaning towards the human capital approach, where we are always talking about preparing a globally skilled labor force who can participate in the whole, who can have I mean a skilled labor force who can participate in the global work arena, and where basically like any other business investment, education is considered again as an investment. Now, even if we look education from the human capital perspective, capital approach, then what is the India scenario? Look at the demographic dividend, the 15 to 19 age group population in thousands. So the year 2020 to 25, you can see this is the period. I mean, we are going through this demographic dividend period where we have that set of population, that number of population who could be given or who could be if education there is in the investment on education on them, then they would be we will probably going to get a skilled labor force. But what is the scenario? The youth illiterate population is 15 to 24% for female. Share of youth not in education, not in employment, not in training, it is 30%. Then again, ratio of female to male labor force participation rate, this is 27%. That means whether if we take the approach of human development or human capital, it is true that we need resources. And over time, the government as well as whatever over time, the different education policies, committees, the political parties, including different election manifestos that we have seen, all are talking about investing on education. And this story of this story of investment on education or school education is not new, because this is the basic fundamental demand for a longer period of time. Now, on whom we have to invest? This is our data set, our distribution. If we look at the child population distribution who are eligible for school education, it's 37 crore. And again, the distribution of girls, scheduled caste children, scheduled tribe children, children with special needs, we can see the size. And what is the size of the school education system at present? There is 15 lakh schools, of them 73% are government and government aided schools. 26.4 crore is the enrollment, of which 61% are in government and government aided schools. And of total 97 lakh teachers, 59% are again government teachers. So this is the whole the size of the school education system right now, and government is through government resources directly. The right hand side, the data I have provided is catering these schools, these children, or these teachers. But like this, whenever we looking at the school education perspective from the financing side, two questions always come everywhere. You will heard these two questions, that how much resource government is spending on school education, and whether this current level of spending is adequate for quality education at school level or not. And now why this question is coming? This question is coming because whenever we look at the different indicators, the one of the indicators that is very prominently actually people are highlighting, that is the learning achievement. And this finance question is evolving from there, that okay, we know there is need for resources, we are putting resources, but still we are not able to achieve whatever we want to in terms of learning outcome. Whatever we want to achieve, we are far away from there. Now, before going to that, the question of whether current how much resource government is spending, the second question, that is whether current level of spending is adequate for quality education or not. This question is, it's important to respond to these questions. Now, this exercise of estimating the adequacy, it has started long back. I mean, it is from the very first, it is in the Article 45 of the Constitution. It's talking about that state shall endeavor to provide within a period of 10 years of the commencement of this Constitution, free and compulsory education to all. And then this process of estimation started with the Kothari Commission. Based on extensive deliberation and some norms and analysis, the committee recommended the 6% of GNP should be required, should be total public expenditure on education in the country, and that would be reached by 1985-86. So these are the stories we know for a long. And this is not, this started with Kothari Commission, but if we look at the chronology of education policies later, various committees, various education commission talks about or have estimated about how much resource would be required to finance school education. So in this connection, next comes the Saikia Committee. Saikia Committee in 1997, they have this expert committee estimated that around 0.7% of additional 0.7% of GDP would be required for school education. Taposh Majumdar committee is very important in this respect. The Taposh Majumdar committee suggested around 1.37 lakh crore over a period of 10-year time frame would be required to bring all the 6 to 14 age group children in the purview of school education, and the time period here suggested 2008. Later, there are a number of CAPE committee, CAPE committee on elementary education, CAPE committee on secondary education. They have also estimated and come out with some data. For example, CAPE committee on secondary education in 2005, they have said that for covering the cost of universalization of elementary and secondary education here class 10, will be required approximately 5.1% of the GDP. And in this chronology, these are all before the right to education came in. It was enacted in 2010 when the right to education was enacted. Before that, NIPA also, not NIPA, I mean that time it was the university, NIPA was also estimated how much resource would be required in the context of RT, and NIPA has suggested around $1.7 trillion would be required. And in this domain, the recent addition is the National Education Policy 2020. Now, NEP has immense significance because it has come after a gap of 30 years. And I mean, the 30 years of the last National Education Policy. But unfortunately, NEP 2020 has very little to offer in terms of financing strategy. This is one of the areas. I mean, if we look at the draft NEP, which was, I mean, not in the public domain or not in discussion anymore, but even that the draft NEP had some fair degree of attention in the about the financing strategy. They have tried to estimate, but this NEP, it has suggested, I mean, it has in the way forward section, they are talking that yes, financing is required, but it has mentioned that as a passing, I mean, there's a passing mention in the final NEP. Now, one of the things that is clear from the whole, the chronology of the different policies or committees which have estimated the school requirement for school education, for universalization of school education, that there is need of resources. Now, the question is that public provisioning for school education is imperative and needs resources, that is true. But whether we are going to put those additional resources, what is the current status, what are the challenges? The most important challenge now we are facing is there is a counter narrative that is it's rotating for a longer period of time now, that policymakers are arguing that government is actually providing adequate resources for school education. And the challenge is not lying in allocation, rather the problem is with underutilization. Now, the fact is underutilization is very much an implementation problem, but that does not stop the question, that does not justify that there is no need of resources. So before shifting from the debate of financing, because the whole debate that we are too much focusing on inputs, on infrastructure, on teacher, there is time has come to look at the outcomes, and that outcome is measured in terms of learning achievement. That is, and that learning achievement is again very crude, is the result in some examination, how we were doing, how we were performing. So before shifting this focus from the financing, it is important to examine that this policy pronouncement vis-a-vis the policy implementation, and also this is important to question that because without knowing the existing quantum of public resources that is going to school education, and how that money is getting allocated across different components, without knowing those factors, it is very much difficult to comment that whether school education system indeed has no resource crisis. So first we need to look at what is there for school education. Now, in the process, the major challenge is, of course, data. Because this is one of the data, how much center, state, local bodies together who are all contribute towards school education, because education is now part of concurrent list from 1976. So the financial responsibility lies with both union government and state government. But it is very difficult to get updated statistics on education finance. And that's why the more important thing is, whenever we are making this debate that there is adequate resources, we are doing this debate with a very limited set of evidence, because we really don't have much data. Now, one of the publications of Ministry of Human Resource and Development, now Ministry of Education, that is called Analysis of Budget Expenditure on Education. This gives information about how much government spending on school education. So if we look at this particular figure, so public spending on school education and public spending on education, as we are mentioning about all these committees, that all who are highlighting that 6% of GDP should be there, and then how much additional resources would be required. And also in the first Education Commission 1968, it says that at least 2/3 of the total public education spending should go for school education. But it clearly shows that we are not even, we are far away from the benchmark that was proposed just 50 years before. Already in yeah, it's more than 50 years that has been 1985-86, it was said that it needs to be achieved. So from 85-86 to 2020, 35 years almost, that we are not nowhere near uh, the estimated benchmark. And this is something that we are asking for a huge amount of resources, because if we look at in comparison to some of the other countries like South Africa, Brazil, they spent much higher amount of resources on school education. In fact, for the public education, the global weighted average, it's much higher. It's 4.9% of GDP, substantially higher than India. Now, okay, if India is spending 2.9% of GDP on school education, then this translates into around 4.4 lakh crore rupees in absolute terms. And of course, this is not a small amount. And especially when different surveys like ASAR, National Achievement Service, they measures learning achievement, and they pointing out that there is a decreasing trend in learning outcomes in government schools. So naturally that the whole debate of input versus outcome while arising, looking at the students' performance, the question comes then that, well, isn't it adequate? So it's important to take a aggregate view of this 4.4 lakh crores amounts budget. So what this budget means in terms of per student spending. If we look at this particular figure, we can see that the per student spending, which basically it's unit cost of prevailing government school education system as a whole. This that means how much resource the state is spending on each child enrolled. And this enrollment we are talking about is both government and government aided schools. Now we can see that all India average is 22,888, whereas the per student spending is varying from 8,000 in Bihar to around 47,000 in Goa. So that means there is huge disparity of spending across states. And in this context, if we also look at the Kendriya Vidyalaya, which is considered as the Union government's model school, Kendriya Vidyalaya is spending around 33,900 rupees per child. That means even if in Kendriya Vidyalaya is considered as benchmark for adequacy, then also there is underfunding in the school education across states. So whether it is at the all India level or if we look from the per student spending perspective, there is under allocation. Now, in the whole process, how responsive is the union government towards school education? Because as we already now know that we know that union government has a financial responsibility towards responsibility towards financing school education. So this is a very common peak. This is the data is very known to us, that how much union government is spending over school education as percentage of total union budget, as percentage of GDP. And if we see over time, the share both in terms of school education budget, union budget, or in terms of GDP, the share of union government is continuously decreasing. And if we look at the economic survey, so economic survey, while explaining this decrease, it was saying that because of the limited fiscal space of the government, the union government is not providing, not able to provide much resources to state. In fact, over the years, this shifting is obligation, union governments shifting this obligation towards states, it become faster after the recommendation of the 14th Finance Commission. 14th Finance Commission was suggested that there should be now larger devolution of central taxes to states from 32% to 42%. That means more flexibility more flexible fund are now with state. So state can have more resources, state can prioritize the spending on education. Now, what union government is doing, besides shifting this responsibility, whatever amount they're putting from their gross budgetary resources or their consolidated fund, there also, if we look at some of the key schemes, that is Sarva Shiksha Abhijan, there is continuing under allocation, persisting under allocation over time. If the first table, if you can see, take any year like 2015-16, the state proposed that around 91,000 crore would be required to for implementation of SSA. Whereas when the proposal was approved in the project approval board and it was approved 61,000. And as per the fund sharing pattern between, because it's a centrally sponsored scheme, so as per the fund sharing pattern, 65:35 in the 65-35 ratio, center should be allocated 38,000. But finally, center has allocated 22,000. So if we look at the first figure, that is state's demand, 91,000. And finally, what is the allocation from center? I mean, we can see, and of course, then 35% budget will be added from the state's kitty. But if this shows that the under allocation towards schemes, towards program is long back. It's not, I mean, the demand for there is adequate resources is not true for even for the union government. And the national education policy, when it comes in 2020, when it's talking about universalization of school education, more resource should be come from public sources. Then also, after NEP is in place, NEP implementation started, or in the budget, we see that union government is in the process of implementing NEP. Then also the same picture. The right-hand side graph, if we see, the Department of School Education and Literacy, they have asked 98,000 to the Ministry of Finance, and they have been allocated 54,000. Similarly, now SSA has transferred to Samagra Shiksha Abhijan with more holistic development, where 3 more schemes have been merged: the school education, the Sarva Shiksha Abhijan, the elementary education program, the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhijan, the secondary education program, and teacher education. 3 programs merged. And then also the pattern of allocation, demand, and the allocation, there is huge gap. In fact, we did a study a few years back, and we have seen that before merging of the 3 schemes, the amount of allocation, the amount of money was going towards SSA, Ramsa, and teacher education separately is higher than the amount allocated towards the scheme Samagra Shiksha Abhijan. Now, the next question is, there is under allocation, the states are not putting adequate, not union government is not putting adequate resources, some challenges in their part, some challenges that there is the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Education, the bargaining is not happening. But how Ministry of Education is financing? If we look that pattern of financing over time, there is increasing dependence on education cess. There is 3% cess being collected for school education, both elementary and secondary and higher secondary education. And the process started from 2005-06 elementary and 7-8 secondary higher education, and then later in 18-19 both together was now been 4% of cess been collected as education and health together. We don't know actually the disaggregation, whether 3% is still going for education or not. But what is important, this cess was introduced as a supplementary to the supplementary support towards the school education. But if we see over time, the cess has become the primary source of financing Samagra Shiksha Abhijan, Sarva Shiksha Abhijan or midday meal, and even in recent times, the Samagra Shiksha Abhijan, where money is getting financed both from primary education cess and secondary education cess, and that is 88%. But the fact is, if we look at the trends in central tax collection, then over time, actually the revenue collection by state has increased, or at least it is saying that the more revenue would be getting collected in the recent years, like 2021, 22. These are estimated figures. But despite that, we are financing education largely from sales. And that is something, uncertainty is attached with this financing process, because if you are if you are financing the key school education programs from sales, and sales collection depend on the number of income taxpayers, then of course there is uncertainty towards financing school education. Now, as I mentioned, that union governments just shifting this responsibility towards the states with this argument that states have now more resources. Now, is this true? How states are budgeting for school education? Is there any scope for reprioritization? So let's look at two very broad indicators. State share of taxes and duties, which have, according to Finance Commission, that component should be now has increased, so more flexibility towards that component. So actually, truly, if you see the union government transferred to states, 14th Finance Commission period is starting from 15-16 to 19-20, this 5 years. 14-15 is the 13th Finance Commission period. So 13th to 14th, if we compare, is actually the more resources is going to states. Now, whether state is prioritizing education, whether it's prioritizing school education. So again, in CBJ, we did a study in 17-18 and tried to see whether states are actually prioritizing education or not. And we have seen a mixed picture. Actually, few states like Chhattisgarh, Karnataka, Delhi, they were putting more resources towards education. But larger focus with this money was on urban development, on infrastructure building, on power. These are the sectors which get which get prioritized with these additional resources. But recently, again, we looked at the state spending on secondary education as percentage of state budget over this period, like 16-17 to 19-20. Indeed, some of the states are actually putting more resources towards secondary education. Now, when if even states are putting more resources towards school education, not necessarily this educational performance depends on how much resources states are getting allocated for the sector, because it's more important how states are designing their school education budget across different components. And when I am talking about components, so the key components for school education, which is responsible for quality, access, and these are school infrastructure, these are teachers. Teachers means both teachers' salary and teachers' training. There is other monetary and non-monetary incentives, which helps to increase enrollment, retention, especially for children who are from marginalized communities. And then in nutritional interventions like midday meals. So these are the components very important whether states are adequately putting resources or not. Now, in this, when we are talking about these components. Teacher salary is teacher is one of the components, which is actually the most important and most debatable component. I mean, if we look at the share of school education budget that is going for teacher salary, then we have seen that it is very strong, 60 to 70% of the total school education budget. In fact, CBJ did a survey for 10 did a study for 10 states, and similarly many other institutions worked on this aspect, and it has been seen that 60 to 70% of the school education budget goes for teacher salary. But this is something not unusual. If we take the reference of OECD countries, on an average, government spends around 80% of their current expenditure on education on the teachers. And given the huge shortage of teachers across states, and even this amount is, I mean, this is very much inadequate. So let's look at some of the status of teachers in some of the states. Overall, and teachers, this is again the teachers who are getting recruited through Samagra Shiksha Abhijan. All India level, at the elementary stage, 22% vacancy. Total, if we look at the absolute number, total sanction post is 19 lakh and vacancy is 4 lakh. And some of the states where the vacancy is quite high is Bihar, Jharkhand, Uttarakhand, West Bengal. I mean, these are all the states have been taken where the percentage of vacant post is quite high. Similarly, the status of teacher vacancies at the secondary level, if we see, again, this is the scenario. Like West Bengal, Jharkhand are some of the states where there are sanctioned posts for secondary school teachers, but till date, no employment, no recruitment happened. Now, these are broad picture. What about the subject teachers at secondary level? The situation is deplorable. Again, see, this is the first figure, Bihar. For English, for 1995 students, there is one English teacher. This is the pupil teacher ratio. For in West Bengal, for mathematics, for 858 teachers, 858 students, there is one teacher. So shortage of subject teachers at secondary level, at elementary level, I mean, teachers at elementary and secondary level overall, and subject teachers at secondary level, there is huge gap. So even recruiting these teachers would require adequate, I mean, substantial resources. But for a longer period of time, states are not actually recruiting regular cadet teacher, because this is they consider this as a fiscal burden, because whenever you are recruiting one teacher, along with salary, you also, this is a long-term commitment, along with salary, you also need to give pension and other incentives, etc. And so this process has stopped for a longer period. All are actually going for contractual recruitment. In fact, in in 2015, there was a subgroup of chief ministers on rationalization of centrally sponsored schemes. And they recommended that after that 12th five-year plan period, that means 2017, center's allocation share for salary and remuneration will not change if there is any further any upward revision of remuneration, or if there is any additional hiring. States are thinking the states need to do it from their own resources. That means this itself also has increased states' fiscal burdens toward teacher recruitments. And now, due to paucity of fund, states are no more opting for permanent cadet teacher recruitment. And in this context, if we talk about NEP, so when we look at the NEP, National Education Policy has given, I mean, so much importance to teachers. It is saying that teacher vacancy should be achieved, I mean, will be filled at the earliest, in a time-bound manner, especially in the disadvantaged areas and areas with large pupil to teacher ratio or high rates of illiteracy. Then the teacher recruitment should be first. And it also have talked about special attention was given to local teachers, employing local teachers or those who are familiar with local languages. But the thing is, the policy doesn't say a single word about what will be the working condition of these local teachers. What will be the salary of this local teacher? Who will hire them? What would be the how they would be trained? In fact, there is no statement in NEP also about discontinuing the practice of hiring contract teachers or para teachers. But more importantly, what NEP has said that there should be merit-based incentive structures, and so incentive will be provided to teachers for teachers to take jobs in rural areas, or especially areas where there is a shortage of quality teacher, but they have linked this merit-based structure with the tenure, promotion, and salary structure of the teachers. That means if you perform, that performance or result-based financing is one of the areas which not very clearly spelled out, but it is an indication in the NEP about teachers. Now, it's not only about, and as I was already mentioning about this, that if we look at some of the states, the proportion of regular teacher and the proportion of teacher salary going as percentage of school education budget, you can see that many of the states where high number of vacancies, they are actually not even spending 60% of the school education budget on teacher salary. So it is not, while education teacher salary is taking the larger pie of the resources, but it is not the case that every state is actually putting adequate resources on teacher salary. And whenever we talk about teachers, we always, whenever we talked about staff, we are more focused on teachers, but there is shortage of staff for in the other fields, in other areas of related to school education. For example, trainers, or for SCERT, teacher training related roles. The SCERT, some of the states figures I have just quoted here. In Tamil Nadu, SCERT vacancy 35%, in diets, the teacher training institute at district level 46%, Karnataka 62%, in SCERT 23% in diet, Rajasthan 56% and 61% in diet. It says adequate. This is enough evidence to show that it's not only about teachers. The challenge of qualified teachers, because professionally qualified teachers is also challenged because of shortage of human resources, and that is because there is not adequate adequate faculty in all the teacher training institutions. And not only the teacher training institutions, even other non-teaching staff like like librarians, security guard, accountant. So if we look at the figure, the ratio is 312 sevens. There is only one non-teaching staff. But again, when we talk about professionally qualified teachers, teacher training is a very important component. Our analysis has shown that teacher training is again another resource-starved area. Of the total school education budget, largely 2 to 4% of the school education budget actually states spent on teachers training. Earlier, as I mentioned that earlier, before Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan was launched in 1989, there was 2 programs, one for pre-service education and the other for in-service training, and both together was spending actually higher than when Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan came, and they merged both the in-service and pre-service education was merged. And after merging also, of the total Samagra Shiksha budgets, 2% is going for teacher education, and which is very less. And if we look at again NEP, the NEP has suggested again for use of technology platforms like Swayam, Diksha for online training of teachers. And there is again Nishtha for national initiatives for school heads and teachers holistic advancement. That is the whole name of the program. For online face-to-face more teachers training platform. For ADP implementation, there is one Sarthak plan, the guideline. Again, if we look at the Sarthak, starting from early childhood education, where we are also thinking Anganbadi workers as teachers, and school education and elementary and secondary education, everywhere the target or the activity suggested are online mode. 6 months training for Anganbadi workers. Then if it is satisfactory, then there will be a diploma course for this Anganbadi worker for to teach the early childhood education. So these kind of suggestions everywhere in the NEP implementation plan. And this whole idea is very much guided, I feel, is by the resource saving, because on offline teacher training has cost implication, and that's why there will always be inclination towards online training in the place of instead of face-to-face training. The another aspect that we should talk more about when we talk about financing of school education, because when we talk about financing of school education, focus largely remains on affordability, on quality, but accessibility, inclusivity, these are the dimensions we miss, and the suggestions, policy suggestions, or the policy implementation that comes, those are not very inclusive. So starting with the out of school children, that is one of the serious problems. Even the NEP has started with that we have 6 to 17 age group, there is 3.22 crore out of school children. And if we again go through the NEP implementation plan, there is too much emphasis on mainstreaming out of school children. And for that, the first criteria is getting a number, because we don't know how many number of children are out of school. And especially after COVID, the situation is more, we know that a large number of children actually pushed out from the school education system. The number would be much higher. But what states are doing, what government is doing to bringing those out of school children in the school education domain? Now, the only intervention that is happening for out of school children is through, again, Samagra Shiksha Abhijan. There is, and what is that? And for us, 6 months and 6 months non-residential or 9 months residential training with a unit cost of 6,000 per child for the 6 months case, and 9,000 per child per annum for the residential case. Now, if when we look at this, the intervention, they have identified the out of school children at the elementary level. This is for the elementary level, and then against that they fund approved for mainstreaming out of school children. And if you look these numbers, then you can see this is not even 1% of the Samagra Shiksha budget. A similar picture is for the out of school children at secondary level. More importantly, while government is talking about, it's a welcome step that has been taken. At least it is talking about there should be survey to bring all out to identify out of school children. But we can see that the large number of states, Bihar, Himachal, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, they didn't conduct any survey. They didn't ask for any budget in the annual work plan and that is not reflected in the annual work plan and budget, because they didn't conduct any survey. So that means we are not even asking for resources to bring out of school children in the mainstream education. In this connection, I also want to mention that there is a project called National Child Labor Project, which is basically to identify child labor and mainstreaming them through in the school education. And that recently that NCLP project has been subsumed under Samagra Shiksha Abhijan. So now even the child labor would be it's the responsibility of Samagra Shiksha to identify child labor and bring them in the education domain, but there is no adequate resources being allocated for that purpose. So together, if we take elementary and secondary level out of school children identified and the budget allocated by states, majority of the states are spending less than 1% of the Samagra Shiksha budget on out of school students. Now, a little bit talk about girls' education, because again, we can refer to the NEP, because NEP has very categorically said that the girls' education is important for society's benefit, and we should focus on 3 to 18 years, 100% gross enrollment ratio from preschool to secondary level by 2030, and girls or transgender children or children from socioeconomically deprived groups should be given importance. And this is again, there is, of course, one challenge is that there is very much homogeneity in the statements, because all the children from marginalized communities have been clubbed as socio-economically deprived groups. But even setting aside that, while the NEP is talking about girls' education, it is not suggesting any resource, any kind of, they're just talking about on gender inclusion fund, but that is not being even neither implemented by union government, but the very concept of gender inclusion fund is very much centralized, because it is saying that the interventions that would be taken through the fund from from the gender inclusion funds at the local level, that would be guided by centers. So there is no such additional intervention for girls' education. But during COVID, before COVID, and I mean after COVID, the girls are the group who are mostly, I mean, they have been suffered a lot compared to many other children. And there is a large number of surveys actually showing that it's showing more than 10 million children in India are going to be out of school at the secondary level. So CBGA along with CRI actually recently did again tried to did one estimation. If all the if government actually wants to universalize and give free secondary education to all girls, that means girls from class 9 to class 12, how much resource would be required? And we have seen that for this government required an additional 0.4 to 0.6% of GDP. And this is this is nothing. 0.4 to 6% of GDP can be easily put into the in the school education budget. But at the same time, we have also given a second scenario, because it's true that not all the 15 to 19 girls are eligible for secondary education at the same time. So there are girls who have left, I mean, who dropped out after class 9, some are after class 10, 11, and so on. And so if we think about, if a more realistic picture, if we take these children, these girls into consideration, then actually 0.2 to 0.3% of additional GDP would be required for girls' education. And again, here to mention that this with our calculation is very much based on the existing provision and financial norms of the government, though we know that there is need for new financial norms, because these are the unit costs are very old and they are not inflation indexed. They haven't those are not revised for a longer period of time. Little bit about pandemic. We did a survey recently in Delhi for the secondary for the, again, girls children for secondary for attending secondary level of education. This is from one of the girls. He says that sometimes, I mean, when we ask that whether you are happy with what are the difficulties you are facing when you are doing the online education, because the digital education or online education that was the buzzword for the last 2 years. And he said sometimes the phone would not be charged as everyone was using the phone. Sometimes the internet recharge was not done. Sometimes my sister's class was at the same time as mine. Sometimes I had to do some household work. There were many interruptions from family members. I would be asked to do this and that, to go out and buy something. And it gives a complete picture of what she suggested, what she shared, that there was challenge regarding device, there was challenge regarding internet, there was challenge regarding the space in house. There was more burden on household work. So these are the all challenges the girls have faced during the pandemic period. And regarding that, the following question we asked, are you enjoying online classes? And then if we look at the response, 80% girls says no, 20% says sometimes. And whereas there is some variation in the response for boys, where they're saying 55% boys says this, they do not like these online classes, but some of them 28% actually says 17% actually says that they're liking this option. So education financing, when we are talking about the more focus in the policy domain, we are seeing that it's shifting towards digital delivery of education, whether it's teacher training, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's curriculum. But the real picture is a large number of children and families are not, basically do not have the basic access or basic services which is required for for attending online classes. This is just two snapshot of a news item. In 2020, we have seen that only 8% of homes have computer with Netlink. In 21, another report, we have seen only 8% rural kids in online classes. So even in 1 year, there is not much change in the digital infrastructure. So why? Because there was not adequate resource even for the for building the digital infrastructure. While we are featuring more on, we are talking about digital infrastructure, there are number of studies which have shown that there is challenges related to access to electricity, access to computers, access to internet facility, quality of internet facilities. These are some of the figures, but we haven't. This was one of the opportunities from where we can identify the policy gaps and take adequate interventions for that. But that was not the case because digital infrastructure was not. Even that was not being prioritized in the resource domain. And it's not only about online education. Online education has hampered the other aspects, the nutrition. For example, the midday meal was infrequent midday meal, not no hot cooked meal. This was the data before the pandemic from the NSS, which was showing by level of education how many children are actually availing free education, how many children are actually availing midday meal. And these are all the so-called freebies, if we say. Then also this was not reaching to the large number of children. And now during pandemic, we have seen the situation was much worse. In this connection, again, it comes to the talk about household expenditure, because the expenditure, since government is not giving, government is not putting additional resources to mitigate the COVID related challenges that school education has faced. We have seen union budget, there is decrease in allocation. We have seen state budget where most of the interventions were towards smart classrooms or this kind of interventions. So naturally, out of pocket expenditure from households, out of pocket expenditure has increased because this additional cost of online education, the additional, those who are in private schools, the cost of tuitions, those who are getting reimbursed through RT and then till class 8 and then suddenly they reach class 9 and there is no support. All those children are now, there is now need to more on the pocket on the income of their households. And if we look at the average out-of-pocket expenditure by household per student, there is huge variation. Even in government schools, this is the data for 3 different kinds of institutions. But even in government schools, a family needs to spend around 6,000 on higher secondary education, or 3,000 on secondary education, and the cost is quite higher at the urban level. So there is challenge for average out-of-pocket expenditure for both rural and urban areas. And in this situation, the added is the edtech industry, because we are promoting for even in our policy, we are promoting for technology, we are promoting for digital education, and this is the looking at this, the edtech industry, the market of edtech industry is booming. The graph is showing that edtech investment in India in the last few years And we can see a huge jump. I mean, in 2016, 16 only 177 US million USD million dollar was invested, and in 2020 2105. This is the allocation. This is the investment by EdTech industry, and some other data. The three major Baiju, An Academy, and the other. I mean, these are the basically front runner in the whole EdTech industry, and some of the figures from 2015 to March 2020. Baiju's garnered 50 million free user and 3.5 million paid subscriber. And between March 2020 to October 2020, by 2020 end, the number of free users has increased to 70 million in few months, and the paid subscriber to 4.7 million. And Baiju and An Academy both raised capital, 2.32 billion and 354 million dollar respectively. I mean, it shows that how the parallel economy or parallel industry, education industry is growing, because there is not adequate public provisioning is happening, or since there is the approach is I mean, it's again if we can say from the Amartya capability approach, that over time, if we are giving lesser amount of resources, I mean, we will adjust with that. We started to believe, yeah, this is the amount for which we need to be happy, and this is actually also happening for the in the domain of school education, or per se education also. But what we have seen, that there is gap, there are large number of evidences showing there is under allocation at the all across all components, starting from teachers to infrastructure to teacher training. And this is originating from deficiencies in planning, the perspective, this which is missing. There is lack of decentralization, there is shortage of staff, there is not proper training and capacity building happening. Community participation is not, I mean, that is not getting encouraged. There is budgetary bottlenecks, because we haven't discussed much about this, but these are implementational challenge, because there is delay in fund flow, there is faulty bookkeeping, a very much top-down approach in decision making, very low and unrealistic unit cost. In fact, in this connection, I need to mention also that again, when we talk about underutilization of resources, we can see that most of the underutilization is happening for the infrastructure component, because of the unit cost, the scheduled rate of for civil work, the money that states are getting from union government, that is very low, and that's why most of the time states are surrendering those resources to union government, because they're not able to utilize that fund, and that's why it's showing underutilization. And so next year, that underutilization is leading to further lesser allocation. And overall, there is systemic weakness, because it's shortage of trained regular staff, the frontline service provider that we just talked about before also, that is the admin person, accountant. Those people are again not in place. So for a sustainable and inclusive recovery of school education, for better utilization, these are the 4 areas actually we need to focus on. Of course, first is human resources, the second is capacity building, third is infrastructure, and fourth is monitoring and evaluation. And in this monitoring and evaluation is very important, and under this domain, data is really important, because many of the challenges that is originating because of the lack of data, because the problem started at the planning level. We really don't know how many disabled children, data and definition. We really don't know how to define what is the actual definition of out of skill children, or children, or how many children are there who are not going to school, how many children with disabilities are there for not getting adequate support. We don't have many kind of databases for non-staff faculty. I mean non staff who are not faculty, and actually that space is shrinking. If we look at the TISS report, many of the indicators are no more there. And this kind of intervention indicators like VRC level, how many persons, CRC level, how many persons. So, and that is challenging the whole process, starting from policy planning to budgeting, and of course that will impact the utilization. Our focus over time, our means government's focus is going towards result-based financing. And as I already mentioned, that NEP also already indicated about that. Then we have seen there is the STAR project by World Bank, where I mean the amount they're investing is only 500 crore, but it's sort of centralization over teachers over in 6 states over, rather than, because 100 crore per year for 5 years this project is, and which is minuscule to change the whole system of the governance, etc. But this is basically control over the states, the teacher training, all these aspects. So we need outcome orientation in the budgeting, because it is required, but we are not in a position yet for performance linked financing, because many of the states, they don't have the basic requirement, basic inputs are in place. So without that, if I mean even that is not in place, if there is no level playing field, so in the absence of that, just linking their performance and then allocating resources according to that performance would be basically would end up in a much worse situation. So there is need for participatory planning, there is need for outcome orientation in budgeting, there is need for focusing, and still need for putting adequate resources towards input, because things are not in place. So focus on learning achievement, that is fine, but before that we need to create an enabling environment. We need to create a sustainable education system. And actually we have so much in the learning achievement. Recently again there is news that Parak is going to have a homogeneous board examination across states, and there is only a single nodal agency will be there, and they will test. So we don't believe in the heterogeneity in the system. We don't believe in the heterogeneity in states, in people, in districts. And that's why the whole concept of uniformity is actually affecting both the resource provisioning, the outcome, and then finally the system is suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. So the floor is now open for questions. If anyone, those who have questions can either put it up in the chat, like I mentioned before, or you can put your hand up so that we can get through all of it one by one. For the time being, there's already a question in the chat box. I can read it out for you. Smriti has asked, can you please again explain the aspect of underutilization leading to lower allocation? I've seen schools having fund for smart classes but not utilizing it. Wanted to understand the aspect more clearly.
Yeah, and sure. Should I go for it?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, how underutilization is leading to under allocation. Suppose again, suppose you have said the money for smart classroom is there lying. Suppose to build a smart classroom, you need 100 crore and you have been allocated 60 crore. That means that is not, I mean, with that, I mean, lesser budget, you will not be able to make a smart classroom. So what we will do, you will, I mean, drop the project. And so naturally you will see that there is underutilization because that money is left with you. Now, when next year it has been seen that, okay, you have been given 60 crore for smart classroom, but you have not utilized that. So instead of 100 crore allocation that you have asked for or that you would require, this again the government will allocate, the government, whether it's union government to school or state government to school, whoever will allocate 70, suppose 70 crore or 50 crore. So naturally you're looking at your underutilization, the next year allocation would be much less, that you have already money left with it. Moreover, you're not able to utilize that money. So this underutilization is resulting in under allocation, but you are not reaching the required amount of 100 crore, and that's why this process continues. So it's a vicious cycle. There is under allocation, that's why you are not able to spend the money, so underutilization, and since you're not able to spend the money, it would be treated as you are not you are not capable of spending that money, so you don't need that much money, so it will be allocated a lesser amount. That's the whole logic. Generally, that is the thing happen.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Smriti, for your question. Arundhati, you can go ahead with your question.
Arundhati, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I got a couple of questions. So you were mentioning about the allocation of funds. So when we talk about allocation of funds, we normally consider infrastructure, food, teachers, etc. And the new education policy, as we all might know, is dressed up like a holistic policy, and it talks a lot about mental health also. So normally, how is it like, how when we allocate funds, are we also taking into consideration about the mental health of our children? How is the situation regarding that?
Any other question, or
Yes. Okay. There is another one. When you also mentioned about learning achievement, how we measure learning achievements. So my doubt is that we have certain target groups which are vulnerable. Normally it's girls or underprivileged students from underprivileged classes or something like that. My question is that if we consider tribals as a specific target groups, again, you have the particularly vulnerable tribal groups as the severely affected group. So when we measure their learning achievement, do we use the same criteria that we use to measure the learning achievements of the general population, or do we have separate criteria for these PVTGs?
Okay. Okay, Arundhati, for your first question about mental health, yes, this is one of the components the guidelines talks about for school education. Mental health, at least over time, it is being given importance. And there is one program called Rashtriya Kishore Swasth Karyakram, or that is under this, there is component of adolescent health and mental health. And the whole idea is, whenever you are preparing your annual work plan and budget, that work plan and budget states prepared to get resources. I mean, they demand resources for different components from center. So idea is, whenever you are preparing the annual work plan and budget, there is a committee. Committee consists of not only teachers, but also the health expert, nutrition expert, and they will place the demand, and accordingly the demand would be reflected in the annual work plan. So if you have saying that there is need for putting resources for mental health, then you will get resources, but generally that is not happening. But recent time we have seen that the government has actually talking about mental health, they have introduced one scheme, but that is again online. So the challenge is, when there is need for resources for mental health, in terms of, say, even for teachers are the first person where students try to share their problems. whether teachers are given that kind of training for the kind of training is required to support the for the well-being of mental well-being of a child. Whether that is happening, that is not happening. Even something if it's happening recently for 3 months, there was a training on mental health. And so the kind of, while we're talking in the policy about mental health, but the kind of interventions we can see, it's not there. And especially in terms of resources, I couldn't find anything. The only thing is there, Manodarpan was the name, I think, I forgot the name, Manada portal, through which it has been, Union government launched this portal if student wants, they can come, they can share their problems, and there will be consultation kind of thing. But yeah, that is the thing. And regarding the learning achievement measurement for tribal children, as far I know, that there is no other way of testing. The only thing is the questions prepared are in generally tribal, the vernacular language or tribal language, so that they can understand about about what the question is all about. But generally, it's a very much homogeneous approach, because if you see the National Achievement Survey, if you see ASER did the survey, the questionnaire they gives and the share in the appendix, you can see it's a question same for everyone.
Ma'am, how can I access these questions that you were talking about?
You go to the National Achievement Survey website, or you go to the if it is about ASER, you go to the open any ASER report.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you for your question, Aditi. Thank you, ma'am. Kamlesh, you can go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yeah, you are. You are.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask some information. She has mentioned about subject-wise distribution of data. I just wanted to get the information of data sources. What are the data sources? I may miss that information, but can you elaborate again the old data slides and the data sources, so that I can go through and get more information about that data source?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So for subject-wise pupil-teacher ratio, the particular slide, or related the information related to vacancy, that is the sources from Parliamentary Standing Committee report, and the subject-wise PTR is the sources the annual work plan and budget that is being submitted by states to the project approval board committee, and then after that the PAB. After that PAB meetings, there is a minute, and you will get where all these details about the state of the the status of the state for each year, and that you will get in the website of Samagra Shiksha Vision. Go to project approval board's minute meetings, and then you will get that information.
Yeah, one more thing. Can you send me the slides you have prepared so that I can understand better, if possible? I will send my mail address to chat.
Okay.
Thank you, Kamlesh. Thank you, ma'am. If anyone else has any questions, you can go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Kundu. My name is Poonama. I'm from the School of Education at TISS-Hyd. I have two questions for you. So the first is that, you were speaking about the national education policy in terms of the broader policies related to education. But now that you've presented the overall scenario of budgeting and allocation, and it looks really poor, to what extent do you think the recommendations that the NEP is making for school education specifically, and I'm referring to, for example, the introduction of vocational education, or the recommendation that a lot of schools, or at least upwards of elementary school, introduce vocational education, to what extent are these recommendations actually grounded in reality when there doesn't seem to be allocation or budgets available even to achieve the most basics? So that is my first question. And the second is, I mean, it was a wonderful presentation, but it paints a really dismal picture of our education system overall. And I was curious to understand what are the broader sort of advocacy efforts in the area within the larger community of sort of researchers like yourself or scholars in the field, and to what extent, in your experience, has the Ministry of Education or other policy makers been receptive to that kind of feedback? And I know much of this is not like, a current context, and I'm sure there's a long history to these efforts, but those are the questions in my head. Thank you.
Yeah, so for the first question, I think you yourself have given the answer, because you have see the data and the pattern of financing, and then you have seen the policy. So, and policy contradicts, I mean, if you read the policy very carefully, it contradicts in every paragraph. Somewhere it's saying something, and the next para it's just I mean, just saying something is. Now, when you are talking about, yes, there is so much focus on some of the areas of school education, like vocational education, like skill, etc. But when it comes to financing, it's not talking about public provisioning. But it has somehow not very clearly spelled out, but open the discussion or open the path of privatization. It's talking about philanthropy or alternative financing. Alternative financing means more about corporate social responsibility in place. Now, regarding CSR, if you say around, I think the largest chunk of CSR money is actually goes for education. But if you would convert it in terms of total budget, it's around 0.083% of GDP. That is the CSR amount which is going for school education. I mean, you can imagine how minuscule it is to change the scenario. And now again in CSR, there is some focus for skill education. So this is the one of the areas which will get support through CSR monies. But other than that, I mean, I don't know, because with the existing system, with the existing pattern of resource allocation, they are proposing these new sets of suggestions, like there is one school complex. They are talking about skill education, vocational education, coding, etc. But if there is no research teacher, if there is no resources, how it's going to happen, we don't know. Because as a suggestion, they're talking about local teachers. As a suggestion, now new policy is coming, like you don't need to have for a university level, basically you don't need to have the PhD or etc. You need to be an expert in the field. So how things are going to happen, there is no clear roadmap. Even if you look at any implementation plan, that is Sarthak I am talking about, there is no such indication. And regarding your second question about advocacy, it's very difficult to do advocacy with Ministry of Education. I mean, from our experience, what we are sharing, because they believe that Ministry of Education is giving adequate, everything is with state. So go and do advocacy with states. And so one of the ways that you can do some kind of advocacy is before the budget state prepared, there is scopes for pre-budget consultations where academia, civil society organizations, economists, educationists, all can participate, and there you can present your demand, your policy as, or what kind of changes, I mean, you are suggesting. That is one of the avenues. The other way is also our whole policy planning is very much top-down approach. But if we look at the guidelines of different schemes, you can see that the it has been said that process should be it should start at the school level. That's why school management committee they are talking about, and who are responsible for preparing school development plan. And what is the school development plan? Based on the survey, household survey, based on the situation, they will prepare a need-based plan, which are the components which need to be focused, on for this particular school. How much, not resources, but how many in terms of quantitative demand, what would be the what is required. This process, this responsibility is on school management committee. So if you can or we can basically work with them, with help in capacity building of the school management committee, probably that over time can sink in and reflect in the policy. Then some reflection we could see at the union level or state level.
Thank you for the question. Thank you, ma'am. There is a question in the chat box. I'll read it out. Lokesh has asked, are there accounts for other actors and finance which is flowing to education sector, be it CSR, civil society, or grants from philanthropies? And he's asked, according to the 86 Kothari Commission, it was 6%. Now, does this calculation is still valid for the current scenario, and how neighboring countries are spending? So please share some light on that.
So I little bit talk about CSR, but if you want to civil society organizations, grant is just not possible. But CSR, if you go to Ministry of Corporate Affairs website, you will be able to see that. And there is some one about the name CSR box. I can share the name, but one of the organization, I think was Swatta Consultancy Firm. I can say it to you later, but they are also try to map the CSR activities by different organizations, and they give some information about the financing. Kothari Commission recommendation of 6%. I mean, that is still the criteria was that the way they calculated was a little bit different, because that time economic growth they have considered, I think 10% if economic grow in that manner. But now that first thing is that 6% we have not achieved, and the shortage is accumulated over time. It might not be, it could be more than 6%, could be less than 6%. We really don't know. But because different, how you want to approach that estimation. If we, a very simple example, suppose under Samagra Shiksha Abhijan, if you are appointing a teacher, that is contractual teacher, his or her salaries 5,000 rupees in Bihar, and Punjab is around 83,000, yeah. If you want to give them salary as per the 7th pay commission, then that would be more than 1 lakh. So it depends on what are the indicators you are taking, what kind of unit cost you are attaching with that indicator. That will change the estimation procedure. So, but Tapas Majumdar committee estimation, if you see, that is more details, and again that also talking about nearly 6% of GDP. So there is many calculations. Pankaj and Jain said 22% of GDP would be required. Recently, actually, NIPP, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, they did one estimation, and they said only 1.4% of GDP additionally would be required for RT. So different organization takes various approaches, various methodology to calculate, but we haven't reached that 6% even. That is more important. And regarding neighboring countries, yes, neighboring countries are spending the data. I really couldn't remember, but if you look at the UNESCO database, you can see the public expenditure on education in different countries. Brazil around 6%, South Africa around 6%, but Pakistan lesser than India. Bangladesh was lesser, but now I think they have increased. It has increased, and Sri Lanka also. So, but I can't quote the figure right now because I couldn't remember the figures. But if you look at the UNESCO database, you will get those figures.
Ma'am, he has put up a follow-up question. Can you please name the model for or term used for calculation?
Model or term used for calculation means? Sorry.
Could you clarify your question once again?
Yeah, I mean, what was the model for the 6% or whatever economic projection that we keep for educational budget? How do we arrive at that point? Is there any particular process or terminology used for this calculations? If you can explain.
Yeah, so I would suggest you to go look at the Kothari Commission report. There are many indicators they have taken. Similarly, if you also want to look at the Tapas Majumdar committee report, the committees I have named, if you go to their report and look at the procedure, different models have been used. Some based on the gap calculation, estimating the gap, and based on that the resource requirement, and some they are looking at the growth of income, growth of the economy. They are suggesting and looking at the growth of education sector, suggesting how much would be required, growth of enrollment over time. So all these parameters taken into account.
Thank you, Lokesh, for the question. Thank you, ma'am. If anyone else has any question, we have time for one more question. So if there are no further questions, we've come to the end of this talk. So definitely public financing of education is one aspect, that has a direct influence on several spectrums of education, like you have mentioned, quality of access and equity, etc. So today we got to look into several attributive factors around this aspect, whether it's the, looking into the policy aspects or the allocation aspects, or even going directly into the implementation or administrative factors that's related to this field. So the perspective that we have received today, especially the comprehensive look that we have looked at, resource allocation with relation to different areas or different fields of allocation, has really probes us to think about the reality or the real picture of the aspects of public financing of education itself. So for that, right now, I would like to take this moment to thank Dr. Provita for accepting our invitation and joining with us today and enlightening us with all the insights that she has given us today. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank all of those who have joined us today for your active participation, for making this talk a success. And we really hope that you'll be able to join us in the further sessions as well. And I thank the school and the administration for helping organizing this talk. Organizing this talk and the opportunity to interact with Dr. Provita. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We've come to the end of it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to me with the patience. I think it's more than 1 year I was talking, but it's good. I really enjoyed the discussion, and so thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pradhiba. Thank you very much.
Excellent.